I want to talk about a house. Not my house. I don't have one. That is the point. I want to talk about the house my parents bought in 1987. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a yard with a tree in it. They bought it for $62,000. My father was 26. He had been working for 3 years. He had student loans, but they were small. They did not feel like a sentence. They felt like debt. There's a difference. A debt is something you can see the end of. A sentence is something you serve. That house is worth $480,000 now. My parents did not do anything to it. They painted it once. They replaced the water heater. Mostly they just lived in it and the number went up. They did not earn that increase. It was given to them by time and by policy and by a set of decisions that were made about this country's economy in the 1980s and 1990s that we are all still living inside of, whether we know it or not. I'm 38 years old. I have a college degree. I have a master's degree. I have been working since I was 22. I do not own a house. My rent has gone up 4 times in 6 years. I have a retirement account that I try not to look at because looking at it makes me feel the specific despair of a person who has done all the right things and still cannot see the shore. I am not unique. I am not special in this. I am one of tens of millions of people my age for whom this is the basic arithmetic of daily life. And the people behind me, the ones in their 20s right now, they're looking at my situation and thinking, that looks like the good version. That is what I want you to sit with for a minute. The generation behind us looks at our struggle and sees the ceiling, not the floor. We were told things. We were told specific things by specific people in positions of authority. We believed them because they were our parents and our teachers and our guidance counselors and the television, and there was no reason yet not to believe them. We were told, go to college. We were told, a degree is a ticket. We were told the investment will pay off. Work hard, stay out of trouble, get the degree, and the economy will hold up its end of the bargain. That was the deal. Those were the terms. We signed up. We took out the loans. We went. Nobody told us the deal had been renegotiated. Nobody told us that between 1980 and 2000, the cost of a college education had increased by nearly 180% after inflation. Nobody put that number in the brochure. Nobody sat us down at 17 and said, the thing we are all selling you has tripled in price since we bought it, and the job market you are entering does not reflect that increase. Nobody said that. They said, go. So we went. And Gen Z, the ones behind us, they were told the same thing. Only by then the tuition had gone up again. By then a year at a state school could cost $30,000. By then the student loan industry had become one of the great wealth extraction mechanisms of the modern era, and the people running it had made sure it was the one debt in America you cannot discharge in a bankruptcy. You can walk away from a mortgage. You can walk away from credit card debt. You cannot walk away from a student loan. They made it that way on purpose. They wrote the law that way on purpose. And most of the people who wrote that law had gone to college when it cost $1,100 a semester. That is not an accident. I want to say that clearly. That is not an oversight. That is a policy choice made by people who had already gotten through the door and then voted to charge everyone else more for the same door and then told the people paying more they were soft if they complained about it. Let us go back to the house. I keep coming back to the house because the house is where you can see the whole thing most clearly. In 1970, the median home price in America was about $23,000. The median household income was about $9,000. You needed to earn roughly 2.5 years of income to buy a median house. 2.5 years. That was the ratio. You saved, you scraped, you got there. In 2024, the median home price is around $420,000. The median household income is around $77,000. You need more than 5 years of total household income, not savings, not down payment, total gross income to buy a median house. And that is before the interest rate. And that is before the fact that in any city where the jobs actually are, the numbers are worse, much worse. In Los Angeles, the median home price is over $800,000. In San Francisco, it is over $1.2 million. In New York, in Boston, in Seattle, in Austin, in Denver, in every place where the economy actually concentrated the work, a 35-year-old making a good salary cannot buy a house without either an inheritance or a miracle. This did not happen because houses got bigger. They did not. The median square footage of a new American home has actually grown, but not to justify a tenfold price increase. This did not happen because construction got dramatically more expensive. It did not. This happened because of zoning. It happened because of policy. It happened because homeowners who voted very high rates and who got to the table first spent 40 years making sure the supply of housing stayed artificially low so that the asset they already owned would keep appreciating. They called this protecting the character of the neighborhood. They called it preserving community. They called it responsible development. What it was price fixing. What it was a long, slow, politely conducted act of economic violence against everyone who came to the housing market after 1995. What it was, and I will say this plainly, and I will not apologize for saying it plainly, was a generation protecting its wealth at the direct expense of the generations behind it. They owned the house. They changed the rules about who else could build one. And then they asked why young people couldn't afford to buy one. And then they said it was the avocado toast. I want to talk about the avocado toast for a second, because I think it deserves to be addressed directly and finally put in the ground. In 2017, an Australian millionaire named Tim Gurner went on television and said, and I am going to be careful with his exact words here because I want to be fair. He said that young people needed to stop buying avocado toast and expensive coffee if they wanted to afford a house. This was reported seriously. It was discussed seriously. People wrote columns about it. Some people agreed with it. The median house in Sydney, where this man was from, costs over $1 million. An avocado toast costs about $22. You would need to skip avocado toast every single day for approximately 125 years to save a down payment on that house. And this man went on television and said the problem was the toast. And people nodded. That is not analysis. That is insult. That is a wealthy person looking at a structural economic crisis and deciding that the cause is the character of the victims. And it worked. It worked well enough that we are still talking about it 7 years later. That is how good they are at this. They can make you feel that your poverty is a personal failing so thoroughly that you start to believe it. We have to stop believing it. And the kids behind us have to stop believing it. And we are going to talk about why right now. I want to give you numbers now. Real ones. Because the numbers are where the argument lives, and I want you to have them. I want you to be able to say them at the dinner table. I want you to be able to say them calmly, the way you say the weather, because they are facts, and facts do not require shouting. Between 1978 and 2022, CEO pay in America increased by 1,322%. That is not a typo. 1,322%. In that same period, typical worker pay increased by 18%. If worker wages had grown at the same rate as CEO pay since 1978, the average American worker would be making about $670 an hour right now. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. It has not been raised since 2009. The people who said it have given themselves raises 16 times since they last raised it. The top 1% of Americans hold more wealth than the entire middle 60% combined. That is not historical. That is not the long pattern of human civilization. In 1978, the top 1% held about 22% of national wealth. Now they hold somewhere around 38%. That shift happened inside of one working lifetime. Inside of our parents' careers. The rules were changed in real time, and most people did not notice because the change was incremental and because the people doing it were very good at telling stories about why it was natural and inevitable and for everyone's benefit. The stories were not true. I want you to know the stories were not true. They said the wealth will trickle down. It did not trickle down. It was one of the most thoroughly tested economic hypotheses of the last 50 years, and it failed every time. Wealth does not trickle. Wealth pools. That is what it does. That is its nature. You have to actually design systems to redistribute it, or it pools at the top and stays there, and the pool gets deeper every year. They said the market will sort it out. The market sorted out 3 things. It sorted out a housing crisis, a student debt crisis, and a healthcare crisis. all three of which fell hardest on the young and the poor and the people who came to the table after the rules were already written. While we are here, I want to talk about what happened to work itself, because it is not just about the pay. It is about what they did to the structure of work and what that cost us in ways that are harder to put a number on. They took the permanent job and they made it contingent. They took the contingent job and they called it freelance, and then they called freelance empowering. You are empowered to have no benefits. You are empowered to have no sick leave. You are empowered to have no pension and no guaranteed hours and no legal protections because you are not technically an employee. You are a contractor. You are a partner. You are a creator. You are a member of the gig economy, which is a way of saying you are a person with a job, but none of the things that used to come with a job. The gig economy. I want to spend a minute on that phrase. The gig economy. It sounds free. It sounds flexible. It sounds like something a young person would enjoy. And sometimes young people do enjoy it because they have been told to enjoy it and because the alternative is nothing, and nothing is worse than something, even if the something is thin. But a gig is what musicians played in bars in 1955 when they could not get a recording contract. A gig was a hustle. A gig was what you did between real work. They took the gig, the thing you did when you had no floor under you, and they built an entire labor model out of it, and they made trillions of dollars, and they gave the workers none of it, and they called it innovation. Uber is worth $80 billion. The median Uber driver makes less than the minimum wage after expenses. DoorDash is worth $20 billion. The average DoorDash driver made $11.48 an hour in 2003, before accounting for car depreciation and gas. The people who own these companies are billionaires. The people who do the work for these companies cannot afford health insurance. This is not a side effect. This is the business model. The business model is find the legal gap between employee and contractor, drive a truck through it, and take everything inside. And when workers tried to close the gap, in California, in New York, through courts and ballot initiatives and legislation, the companies spent hundreds of millions of dollars fighting them. Uber and Lyft spent $224 million on a single California ballot measure to keep their workers classified as contractors. $224 million to make sure the people delivering their value could not have sick days. That is the world Gen Z is entering. Not entering, has already entered. They entered it without ceremony, and nobody apologized. I want to talk about what they have said about Gen Z because I need you, the Gen Z people in this conversation, to hear this from someone who watched the same thing happen to us and who knows exactly what it is. They have said you are soft. They have said you cannot take criticism. They have said you need participation trophies and safe spaces, and that you're too online and too sensitive and too easily offended, and that you lack resilience, and that you would not have survived what previous generations survived. I want to address this directly. Ready? Here it is. You are the generation that came of age during a global pandemic. You did your high school years, some of you your entire high school, on a laptop in your bedroom. You watched adults argue about whether the pandemic was real while the pandemic killed your grandparents. You entered the job market during an economic disruption that followed a financial crisis, that followed another financial crisis. You're trying to buy homes in a market that has been deliberately constipated by people who got in before you and then voted to lock the door. You are carrying student debt that previous generations did not carry for degrees that used to cost a fraction of what they cost now. You are the first generation in American history that is statistically expected to be poorer than your parents. The first one in the history of a country that has defined itself by the idea that each generation would do better. And they say you are soft. They say you need therapy too much. You know what my grandfather's generation called needing therapy? They called it drinking. They called it working 20 hours a day until your heart stopped at 61. They called it silence. They called it not talking about it and dying early and leaving a family that didn't know them. That was the alternative to therapy. That was the resilience. That was the toughness. And we are supposed to hold that up as the standard. You are not soft. You are the first generation honest enough to say, this is hard and I need help with it. That is not weakness. That is the most accurate thing any generation has said in 100 years. The generation that cannot afford a house is not soft. The generation that cannot afford a house was sold a broken promise and then blamed for noticing it was broken. There's one more thing. I've been going around it, and now I am going to say it. They were told. They were told in 1988. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established in 1988. James Hansen testified before the United States Senate in 1988 and said, "The Earth is warming because of greenhouse gases, and if we do not act, the consequences will be severe." That was 1988. That was 36 years ago. The oldest millennials were 7 years old. Gen Z was not born yet. They were told, and they did not act. They did not act because the people who owned the oil and gas industry spent billions of dollars making sure they did not act. They funded think tanks that produced doubt. They funded politicians who performed confusion. They created an atmosphere, the word is not accidental, of deliberate uncertainty around something that the science was not uncertain about. They bought 36 years, and in those 36 years, the carbon in the atmosphere went from 350 parts per million to over 420. And the window to prevent the worst consequences got smaller every year, and now it is very small, and the people who made it small are mostly retired or dead, and the people who will live inside the consequences are in this conversation right now. I'm a millennial. I will live inside some of these consequences. I will see worse storms. I will see worse heat. I will see water scarcity and food disruption and more pandemics because deforestation and habitat loss are engines of viral spillover, and they are still happening. I will see some of this. Gen Z will see more, and the generation after Gen Z, if you want to have children, if you can afford to have children, which is another conversation, they will see more still. They will inherit a planet that is materially worse than the one my parents inherited, and the difference is not an act of God, and it is not bad luck. The difference is 36 years of people choosing quarterly profits over a livable world. That is not a political statement. That is a physical fact. The physics does not have a party. I know someone watching this wants to say, but both sides. I know that is the instinct. I know it feels balanced and fair, and it is how we've been trained to process political information. Both sides, both parties, both perspectives. I want to be honest with you about the both sides problem. The both sides framework was not given to us as a gift. It was given to us as a management tool. When one side wants to raise the minimum wage and the other side does not, that is not a both sides situation of equal merit. When one side wants to cancel student debt and the other side calls it unfair to people who already paid theirs off, as if the solution to an unfair system is to make sure everyone suffers equally inside it rather than fixing the system, that is not a balance of wisdom. That is an argument in bad faith dressed up as a principle. I am not a partisan person. I want to say that carefully. I have voted for candidates from more than one party. I have been disappointed by candidates from more than one party. I think the Democratic Party has failed young people in specific and measurable ways, and I am willing to say that in detail on a different day. But I will not do the thing where I say both sides equally seem reasonable when the evidence does not support equal distribution of responsibility for what has happened to our generation and the one behind us. What has happened to us has specific causes. The causes have specific names. The names have specific voting records. Those voting records are public. That is all I am saying. Do the reading. I want to turn a corner now. I want to talk about us, Millennials and Gen Z, in the same breath, because I think there is a conversation we need to have with each other, and it is not happening enough. There is sometimes friction between us. I have felt it. You have felt it. There are Millennials who look at Gen Z and feel vague irritation of a generation that suffered first, watching the one behind them get the language for it before they did. We did not have the words for burnout when we were burning out. We did not have the framework for systemic inequality when we were living inside it. We were just confused and tired and in debt, and we called it adulting and made jokes about it on Twitter because what else do you do? And then Gen Z showed up with the vocabulary and the therapy speak and the framework, and some of us reacted badly to that. Some of us said you were too much. Some of us said you talk about yourselves too much. Some of us said I had it hard too, and I did not make it everyone else's problem. I want to say to those millennials, and I have been one of those millennials at my worst moments, that this is the internalized part of it. This is us doing to them what was done to us. This is the person who got hazed defending the hazing because they survived it. The fact that we suffered without the language does not mean the language is wrong. The fact that we got through does not mean getting through was okay. We did not get through fine. We got through. There is a difference. We should be their allies. We should be their loudest allies, because we are close enough to see what is happening to them clearly and old enough to have the credibility to say it without being dismissed as young and idealistic. We are the ones who can stand in the middle and say, I did what you told me to do, and it did not work the way you said it would, and the ones behind me were never even told a plausible story. We are the bridge. That is our position. We can be angry from the middle, and it can be useful. And to Gen Z, I want to say, we see you. The older millennials especially. We were told we were the entitled ones first. We heard this in 2005, 2006, 2007. Every generation of young people gets called entitled by the people currently in power because calling them entitled is cheaper than addressing their legitimate grievances. You are not entitled. You are accurate. There is a large difference. Your instinct that something is wrong is correct. Your reading of the situation is not the naivety of youth. It is the clear sight of people who arrived after the mythology had already started to crack, and who can see the cracks because they were not there when the building looked new. You did not romanticize it. You just looked at it and described what you saw. That is not entitlement, that is honesty. I want to talk about the dinner table for a minute, about what happens when you are at a holiday table and someone from the older generation says, I don't know why young people can't just buckle down and save up. About what happens in that moment, because that moment happens. It happens to almost everyone in this conversation. It has happened to me, more than once. What usually happens is one of two things. Either you stay quiet because it is a holiday and you do not want to start something, or you start something and it goes badly and you leave feeling worse than if you had stayed quiet. I am not going to tell you to stay quiet. I am not going to tell you that either. What I'm going to tell you is how to say the true thing without losing the room. You say, can I show you something? And you pull out your phone and you show them the numbers. The actual numbers. The median home price in this city divided by the median income. The cost of the same degree in 1985 versus today. The hourly wage in 1975 versus today, adjusted for inflation. You do not argue. You do not raise your voice. You say, here's what the math looks like from where I am standing. And you let them look at it. Some of them will reject it. Some of them will say the numbers are from a biased source, or that they do not tell the whole story, or that their generation had it hard too. And they did have it hard too, in ways that are real and worth respecting. You can say that. You can say, I know things were not easy for you either. I know you worked hard. I am not saying you did not work hard. I am saying the ground under the hard work has shifted, and I want you to see that. Some of them will. Some of them will really look. And some of those will feel something crack open. And that crack is where the conversation starts. That is the moment. That is all you are trying to get to. Not a victory, not an apology, just a crack. A small acknowledgement that the world you inherited and the world we are in are not the same world, and that the difference is not our personal failing. That crack is worth more than a shouting match. The shouting match gives them permission to stop listening. The crack requires them to stay in the room. Okay, we have been in the problem for a while. Let me say some things about the other side of it. The people who set these conditions are not immortal. They vote at high rates because they have time to vote and because they have been voting for 60 years and is it a habit. Habits can be matched. Young voter turnout in 2018 was the highest midterm turnout for young voters in 25 years. In 2020, youth turnout was the highest it had been since 1972. In 2022, young voters were the primary reason several critical Senate races went one way instead of another. This works. Voting works. It is slow, and it is frustrating, and the choices are often bad, and the system has been gerrymandered in specific ways to dilute young urban votes, and those dilutions are real and need to be fought legally and legislatively, and they are being fought. But the voting works. When it happens at scale, it works. We have the numbers. Millennials and Gen Z together are now the largest voting bloc in the American electorate. Larger than boomers, larger than Gen X, larger. And we vote at lower rates, and that is on us. That is the one thing that is genuinely on us, and I will say it clearly. Vote in the primaries. I cannot say this enough. The general election gets all the attention, but the primary is where the actual shape of the choice is made. Most incumbents in safe districts never face a serious general election challenge. They face primary challenges. The primary voter is disproportionately old. The primary voter is disproportionately homeowning. The primary voter is the person who has been setting the agenda for 30 years. You can be that person. You can be in that room. You just have to show up in June instead of only in November and run. I mean this literally. Run for city council. Run for school board. Run for state legislature. The people setting zoning law, the people deciding whether your city will build enough housing, they are at the local level. They go to city council meetings where 3 homeowners show up to oppose a new apartment building, and they vote against the building because those 3 homeowners are the only constituents in the room. You can be in the room. You can bring people to the room. Local politics is where housing gets decided, and housing is where the whole thing starts. And organize at work. The union density in America was 35% in 1954. It is about 10% now. The decline in union density tracks almost exactly with the decline in middle-class wage growth. These are not coincidental trends. When workers have collective power, wages go up. When collective power is broken, wages stagnate. The power was broken deliberately. The legislation that made it harder to organize was passed deliberately. It can be undone. It is being undone, slowly, in Amazon warehouses and Starbucks stores and university campuses. It is slow. It is worth doing. I want to end with the honest version of this. I do not think the generation ahead of us is evil. I do not think they sat in a room and decided to take everything. Most of them did what people do. They protected what they had. They voted in their immediate self-interest. They told themselves a story about how the world works, and that happened to be very flattering to the choices that they had made. Most people do this. We will do this. We are probably already doing some version of this that we cannot see because we are inside it. But I think there is a difference between understanding why something happened and accepting that it was okay. I can understand why someone protected their home value and still think the policy was wrong. I can have sympathy for a person and not have sympathy for the system they built and voted to maintain. Those are not the same thing. The conflation of them is one of the tools used to keep us quiet. If you criticize the system, you are accused of hating the individuals. It is a shell game. Do not play it. The system is wrong. The system produced a country where the median millennial has a fraction of the wealth the median boomer had at the same age. The system produced a country where a generation is delaying or foregoing children, not because they do not want them, but because they cannot afford them. The system produced a country where a 24-year-old with a college degree and a full-time job cannot afford to live alone in any major city in America. The system produced this, and the system can be changed, and the changing of it is not radical. It is not extreme. It is the restoration of conditions that existed within living memory. It is building enough houses. It is making college affordable or free. It is raising the floor on wages. It is making healthcare not a financial catastrophe. These things exist elsewhere in the developed world right now today. They are not utopian. They are policy choices, and policy choices can be made differently when different people are in the room making them. Get in the room. That is the whole speech. Get in the room and stay in the room and bring people with you, and do not leave when it is slow, and do not leave when it is frustrating, and do not leave when someone tells you that you do not understand how it works, because you understand exactly how it works, and that is why you are there. You are not soft. You are accurate, and accurate people who stay in the room change things, slowly, imperfectly, but they change them. That is the job now. That is what we have. That is enough. My parents' house is worth $480,000. They did not do anything to it. The number went up while we were working. Now we know why. Now we do something about it. That is all.